Mick Fleetwood, drummer and founding member of Fleetwood Mac. When I was first introduced to Mick Fleetwood, we were both 16, and though I was still a schoolgirl, he had already left his home in Salisbury, in southwest England, to make his way all alone to London. As a child, he had discovered the drums, and it was an intense revelation for him. He knew without a doubt that he wanted to be a drummer. This was much, much more than a childhood whim. From that moment on, he lived and breathed the drums, much to the dismay of his schoolteachers, whose classes he failed, and his parents, who worried what would become of their wayward son. They needn't have worried. Mick had more motivation and drive to become a professional drummer in his little finger than most studious schoolboys have in their entire being. Mick knew deep inside that his destiny awaited him out there, and that he was only biding his time until the day came when he could begin his journey into musicianship. This is what he told me. I was obsessed with wanting to be a drummer. I didn't drool over a musician and think, I've got to be like that player. It simply happened. That was it. I wanted to be a drummer, and I can't remember why. It had to be from my dad. He would play the bottles, or even play rhythms with the change in his pocket. I rely completely on instinct as a player. Often, while I'm playing, there are certain moments when I disappear. Peter was absolutely oozing with feel, and I've never played with anyone who was that profound and so involved with that conviction. I think he saw that in me. There was an affiliation with this funny guy who was not such a great drummer, but someone who was able to express himself without worrying how clever he was, and that really applied to what Peter represented as a player. I remember one time when my family was driving through Europe, we stopped in a small German village. There were cows underneath the inn we stayed in, and these old yogurt-eating guys who lived to be 120, sitting around downstairs in the inn. They were all sitting around a 12-volt battery with a wire attached, getting a buzz out of it. That was the setting. Before going to bed that night, I crept downstairs and saw Dad in the bar with all these elderly guys playing the bottles, having a great time. At boarding school, I became obsessed with playing drums. I never had a kit, never played. It just started to happen. I had this dream. I wanted to be playing in London at a club. I had it all planned out. All I did at school was to send away for drum catalogues. The only other thing I enjoyed was a little bit of acting I did. I had a drum catalogue that was literally 8 inches thick. I had taped them all together. I used to drool over these drums. It was my dream to have a premier drum kit. I remember going out on my own and sitting underneath a tree. I had my catalogues with me, and I just made a secret pact then and there with myself that I was going to play drums. I remember tears pouring down my face, and that was it. That was the moment I knew I wanted to do this. I ran away from school because I had this vision. I knew what I wanted to do, so that was the commitment I made to myself. I made a private pledge, and I prayed to God, and then that was it. I didn't practice or work at being a drummer. I just did it. There were a few drum styles I mimicked, but that stopped after I started playing with other people. Apart from learning the songs, my practice was my playing. My dad was wondering what the hell I was going to do. He wanted to take me to an unemployment counsellor. But not long after that, I started playing drums in London at the Mandrake Club. And now, let's hear from Mick himself.
I'm going to read something that I wrote many, many years ago when this first was seen, was in the first edition of working on my part of supporting the work of Jenny Boyd, who wrote the book back then. She's gone on to be part of so many lovely things in her world. And right now, I'm going to read what I said all those years ago, which is going to be interesting. You have to work at it in some way, preserving the precious childlike part of you. There is some part of me that turns my back on bringing in too much information. I think it can be a little detrimental. It's more important to preserve the innocence that you have, the open book. As long as the whole book doesn't go yellow after you get older, if it's just the edges, then it means you're doing all right. And that's like a child. You come in and all you are is an open book, just waiting to absorb. Music is definitely a barometer of social malady and wellness. Music causes something that either excites or calms down or instigates without even a word being said. A verbal onslaught is part of music, but what music should represent ultimately is harmony. That's my real sense of what sound is, to bring harmony. That would be the whole point, that people can express themselves through. And there is nothing without rhythm, no order, seasons, nothing. In terms of real high points, without any question, it would be when I was playing drums with Peter Green. I'd be completely crying, weeping. It still happens, but it used to happen all the time. I was so devoted to that. It was very, very vivid, and I had a sort of addiction to it. There were times I would be pulled into a situation. It was the highest quotient of that happening. A lot of it was because of literally being there with him. The ride was just as good as driving.